I never expected my life to change on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. It was supposed to be like any other day. Work, gym, dinner, and then maybe some TV before bed. I was tired but content. Life had its stresses, but I believed I had built something solid with my wife, Sarah. At least, that's what I thought. That day, Sarah mentioned she was meeting her old college friend, Emily, for lunch. It wasn't unusual. Sarah had always been social. She left home in her usual way, smiling, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing that flowy sundress I had bought her last summer. I didn't think twice when she kissed me on the cheek and said, "Don't wait up. Emily's in town for a few days, so we might chat for hours." It wasn't until later, when I stopped by a downtown restaurant to grab a quick bite, that I saw her. At first, I wasn't sure. The restaurant was crowded, and I was distracted by my phone. But then my eyes drifted toward the corner booth, where she sat, laughing, her head tilted in that familiar way, her hand lightly brushing the arm of the man across from her. It wasn't Emily. The man was tall, clean-cut, dressed in a sharp blazer that suggested success, or at least the appearance of it. They were leaning in close, their plates untouched, as if the food in front of them was just a prop for their conversation. Sarah looked happy, happier than I'd seen her in months. That realization hit me like a gut punch. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe this was Emily's boyfriend, or a colleague, or someone else entirely. But deep down, I knew better. Her posture, her gestures, even the way she touched her hair. All of it was different. I had known her for years. I knew every nuance of her body language. And this wasn't how she acted around just a friend. Frozen in place, I debated what to do. Should I walk over, confront her, or slip out quietly and pretend I hadn't seen a thing? My instincts told me to wait. Losing my temper or acting impulsively wouldn't get me anywhere. So, I left. But as I sat in my car in the restaurant parking lot, my hands gripping the steering wheel, a seed of doubt began to grow. I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. If Sarah was hiding something, I needed to know. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. The drive home felt endless. My mind raced as I replayed every detail. Sarah's laugh, the way she leaned in, the spark in her eyes that I hadn't seen in months. I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, but deep down, I knew. Something was wrong. When I got home, I decided to play it cool. If Sarah was hiding something, she'd be expecting suspicion. No, I couldn't let on that I'd seen her. Instead, I'd observe, listen, and let her show me the cracks. She got home a little after 9 p.m., carrying a shopping bag from a boutique she rarely visited. She walked in, smiling like she had no care in the world. "Hey, babe," she chirped, setting the bag on the counter. "Emily says hi, by the way. We had such a good time catching up." Her tone was light, casual, too casual. I forced a smile, careful to keep my voice steady. "That's great. What did you guys do?" "Oh, just the usual," she said with a wave of her hand. "Lunch, some shopping, a lot of reminiscing." She's still as hilarious as ever. She was looking at me, but not quite. Her eyes flitted between me and the bag on the counter, like she was trying to gauge if I suspected anything. "Sounds fun," I said, leaning back against the kitchen island. "Where'd you go for lunch?" She paused, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. "That little Italian place downtown, Trattoria Bella. You know the one." I felt my chest tighten. That wasn't where I'd seen her. The restaurant she was at was on the other side of town, nowhere near Trattoria Bella. But I didn't call her out on it, not yet. Instead, I nodded, feigning interest. "Nice choice. Did you get the carbonara? That's your favorite, right?" She smiled, forced, stiff. "No, I wasn't super hungry. Just had a salad." "A salad?" The table she shared with him had been cluttered with plates. I could still see the wine glasses in my mind, the remnants of a shared dessert. The longer she talked, the more I noticed the small inconsistencies in her story. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Her voice had an edge to it, as though she were bracing herself for a challenge that hadn't come yet. But I didn't press her. I couldn't give her any reason to tighten her defenses. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I listened to her breathing slow and even out as she fell asleep. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I didn't want to believe she was capable of lying to me. But the more I thought about it, the more pieces started falling into place. The last few months had been strange. Sarah had started working late more often, her phone glued to her hand like a lifeline. She'd grown distant, making excuses for why she couldn't join me for dinner or why she needed me time. At the time, I chalked it up to stress, a rough patch. Every marriage had them, right? But now I wondered how much I had missed. The next morning, I made a decision. I needed answers. Real answers. If Sarah was hiding something, I was going to find out exactly what it was. I started small. While she was in the shower, I glanced at her phone, which was charging on the nightstand. But it was locked. She'd changed her passcode. That wasn't unusual in itself, but she'd always shared it with me before. Why not now? I put the phone back before she came out, my heart pounding. Over breakfast, I tested her again. So, what's Emily up to these days? I asked, keeping my tone light. Sarah froze for just a moment, her fork hovering over her plate. Oh, not much. She's been traveling a lot for work. Lucky her, right? Traveling? Huh. Must have been a nice break for her to be in town. Yeah, definitely, Sarah said quickly, her smile too bright. Anyway, what's your schedule like today? Busy? She was deflecting, avoiding. I could feel it. That afternoon, while Sarah was out running errands, I decided to dig deeper. I opened her laptop, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain what I'd seen. Her email was open, and while most of it was innocuous, work memos, store promotions, there was one name that kept popping up in the subject lines, Ryan. Curious, I clicked on the most recent email. It was short and vague, but the tone was intimate, familiar. Lunch was great yesterday. Can't stop thinking about it. Let me know when you're free again, R. I felt a cold wave of anger wash over me. There it was. The proof I didn't want but couldn't deny. She wasn't just lying. She was meeting him behind my back. But I didn't stop there. I clicked through more emails, piecing together their conversations. Ryan was no friend or colleague. He was something more. And from the sound of it, this wasn't new. It had been going on for months. By the time Sarah came home, I was back to pretending everything was fine. She greeted me with a kiss, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. If Sarah was playing a game, I needed to make sure I won. And that meant staying one step ahead. The more I thought about it, the more I realized. Confronting Sarah now would be a mistake. She'd deny everything, twist the truth, or worse, find a way to flip the blame onto me. I had to be careful, methodical. I needed more than just vague emails and gut instincts. I needed hard evidence, something she couldn't talk her way out of. That evening, I stayed quiet, watching her as we ate dinner. She seemed relaxed, even cheerful, humming along to the music playing softly in the background. It was almost impressive how effortlessly she wore the mask of the loving wife. But I couldn't stop seeing her at that restaurant, laughing with Ryan, leaning in close like I didn't exist. The next day, I took the first step in my plan. I installed a tracking app on her phone. It was surprisingly easy. Sarah wasn't exactly tech-savvy, and while she left her phone locked, I'd watched her enter her new passcode enough times to figure it out. Within minutes, I had access to her location, her messages, and even her call logs. I hated doing it, invading her privacy, but every time I felt a twinge of guilt, I reminded myself that she was the one who'd betrayed our trust. If she wanted to live a double life, then she'd have to face the consequences. The app didn't take long to pay off. That afternoon, while I was at work, I got an alert. Sarah wasn't at the grocery store like she'd said she'd be. Instead, she was parked at a coffee shop downtown. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I left work early, telling my boss I had a personal emergency. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I drove across town, trying to suppress the anger bubbling inside me. By the time I arrived, I was a bundle of nerves, unsure of what I'd find. Parking a few spaces away, I spotted her car immediately. Sure enough, through the large windows of the coffee shop, there she was, sitting across from Ryan. They weren't holding hands or leaning in close like they had at the restaurant, but the familiarity was there. The way they smiled at each other, the ease with which they spoke. It was undeniable. I took out my phone and snapped a few photos, my hands trembling as I tried to steady the camera. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart instead of my own. I debated going in, confronting them right then and there. But I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time. If I wanted to expose Sarah's lies, I needed to do it on my terms, not hers. That night, I reviewed the photos, my resolve hardening. Sarah had no idea I'd followed her. No idea I was piecing together her betrayal bit by bit. But I wasn't done. I needed more, proof that would make it impossible for her to deny what she'd done. The next step was harder, but necessary. I hired a private investigator. I found a local agency online, one with solid reviews and a reputation for discretion. The man I met, a grizzled ex-cop named Frank, listened intently as I explained the situation. He didn't ask unnecessary questions or judge me for snooping on my wife. Instead, he nodded and jotted down notes, his expression serious. "You're doing the right thing," he said as we wrapped up the meeting. "If she's hiding something, we'll find it." Over the next few days, I carried on as usual, pretending everything was fine while Frank worked in the background. Sarah seemed none the wiser, her routine unchanged. But now, every smile, every laugh, every touch felt hollow. Frank's first report came back sooner than I expected. He'd followed Sarah to a hotel on the edge of town, where she'd met Ryan for a late lunch. They'd spent nearly 3 hours there before leaving separately. He sent me photos, blurry but unmistakable. The two of them walking side by side, laughing as they disappeared into the lobby. It was the confirmation I needed, but it also hit me like a punch to the gut. Knowing was one thing. Seeing it was another. That night, I sat alone in my office, staring at the photos spread out on my desk. I felt a strange mix of anger and sadness, like a weight was pressing down on my chest. I'd given Sarah everything, my time, my trust, my love, and she'd thrown it away for some guy she'd probably met a few months ago. But as much as it hurt, it also fueled me. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I started making plans, mapping out every step. I didn't just want to confront her. I wanted to expose her for who she really was, to make her understand the gravity of what she'd done. And when the time came, I'd make sure she had no escape. The days that followed felt surreal, like I was living in two parallel worlds. In one, I was the devoted husband, making small talk with Sarah over breakfast and pretending not to notice when she smiled at her phone or disappeared for hours at a time. In the other, I was the man determined to uncover the truth, working with Frank to pull every thread of her betrayal. The second report came 2 days later, and it was damning. Frank had captured them at another hotel, this time entering together in broad daylight. He even recorded footage of Sarah and Ryan sitting in the lobby, their hands intertwined as they talked. Seeing them like that, so open, so comfortable, was infuriating. They weren't just sneaking around. They were flaunting it. Frank included timestamps, receipts, and surveillance footage that left no room for doubt. It wasn't just an affair. It was a full-blown relationship. They'd been meeting regularly, sharing meals, spending hours together at places Sarah had never once mentioned to me. But it was the next discovery that truly pushed me over the edge. "I dug into Ryan," Frank said during our latest call. "He's not just some guy she met at work. He's been in and out of relationships like this before. Serial cheater. Has a record, too. Domestic disturbances, financial disputes, that sort of thing." "What about Sarah?" I asked, my voice tight. "Does she know about his past?" "Hard to say," Frank replied. "But from the way they act around each other, it doesn't seem like she cares." The thought of Sarah throwing away everything we built for a man like Ryan made my blood boil. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was risking our future for someone who didn't deserve her trust any more than he deserved mine. But I didn't let the anger consume me. Not yet. Instead, I began preparing for the confrontation. If I was going to do this, I wanted it to be undeniable. I wanted Sarah to see, to feel, exactly what she had done. I printed out every photo, every email, every report. I organized them into a neat folder, each page a piece of the puzzle she had tried to hide. Then I backed it all up on a flash drive, just in case. But I didn't stop there. I started looking into our finances, combing through every bank statement and credit card bill. At first, nothing seemed out of place, but then I noticed the charges, small at first, then larger. Boutiques, high-end restaurants, hotels, purchases I hadn't authorized, at places I hadn't been. She wasn't just spending time with Ryan. She was using my money to fund their little escapades. That realization hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't about the money itself. I could make more of that. It was about the principle, about the audacity of it. I called my lawyer the next day. "Mark," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me, "I need to file for divorce. And I need it done right." Mark had been a friend of mine for years, a man who didn't pull punches and knew how to navigate situations like this. He asked all the right questions, listened without judgment, and assured me that we'd get through this. But before we filed anything, I had one more thing to do. I needed to confront Sarah. I planned it meticulously. I didn't want to ambush her or corner her in a way that would let her turn the tables. I wanted her to see everything laid out in front of her, to face the truth with no escape. The opportunity came on a quiet Saturday morning. Sarah had mentioned she'd be meeting a friend that afternoon, but before she could slip out, I stopped her in the kitchen. "Hey," I said casually, setting my coffee cup on the counter. "Can we talk for a minute?" She looked up from her phone, her smile faltering when she saw my expression. Sure. What's up?" I gestured toward the dining table. "Why don't you sit down?" Her brow furrowed, but she complied, pulling out a chair and sitting across from me. I could see the unease in her posture, the way she gripped her phone like a lifeline. I took a deep breath, then placed the folder on the table between us. "What's this?" she asked, her voice wary. "Something I think you should see," I said, sliding it toward her. She hesitated, then opened the folder. Her face went pale as she flipped through the pages, her eyes darting over the photos, the emails, the receipts. What is this?" she stammered, her voice shaking. "You tell me," I said calmly, leaning back in my chair. "You've been meeting him for months, haven't you? Using my money, lying to my face. So go ahead, Sarah. Explain it." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time in weeks, she looked genuinely caught off guard. I can explain," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can you?" I asked, my tone sharp. "Because I've been watching. I know where you've been, who you've been with. I know about the hotels, the lunches, the money. So don't insult me by pretending this is something it's not." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. "Not this time." "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking despite myself. "Why would you do this to us?" "To me?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the photos, her tears dripping onto the pages. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I was lonely. I felt invisible." "Invisible?" I repeated, my anger flaring. "You think that justifies this? You think that gives you the right to throw everything away?" Her silence was answer enough. Sarah didn't say a word for what felt like an eternity. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the folder again, staring at the evidence of her betrayal. I watched her carefully, my emotions a volatile mix of anger, sadness, and a strange sense of relief. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. No more lies. No more guessing. Finally, she looked up at me, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. I folded my arms, my tone cold. "You can start with the truth." Her lip quivered, and for a second, I thought she might break. But then, like a switch had flipped, her expression hardened. "You don't understand," she said, her voice defensive now. "You're not innocent in this either." I narrowed my eyes. "Oh, please, enlighten me, Sarah. What exactly did I do to deserve this?" "You've been so distant," she shot back, her voice rising. "All you ever care about is work, your projects, your routine. When was the last time you looked at me like I mattered? Like I was more than just some roommate?" Her words hit me like a slap, but I refused to let her see it. "You're blaming me?" I asked, my voice sharp. "You're seriously trying to turn this around on me?" "I'm not blaming you," she shouted, her composure cracking. I'm just saying. I felt alone, Ethan. And Ryan. He made me feel seen. Seen, I repeated bitterly. So that's all it took? Some guy to buy you a few lunches and tell you you're pretty? It wasn't like that, she snapped, her voice breaking. It wasn't planned. It just happened. It just happened, I said, shaking my head in disbelief. You don't accidentally lie to your husband for months. You don't accidentally sneak off to hotels. You don't accidentally throw away your marriage for someone like him. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought I saw regret. But then she stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm not going to sit here and be attacked, she said, grabbing her phone and turning toward the stairs. Don't you dare walk away, I said, my voice low and dangerous. She froze, her back to me. What do you want from me, Ethan? She asked, her voice weary. An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. Is that what you need to hear? No, I said, standing and stepping closer. I don't want an apology. I want you to admit what you've done, to take responsibility for the fact that you destroyed our marriage. She turned slowly, tears streaming down her face. You think this is easy for me? Do you think I wanted to hurt you? Then why did you? I demanded, my voice cracking despite myself. Why wasn't I enough for you? Her silence was answer enough. I sank into the chair, suddenly feeling exhausted. The anger that had been sustaining me began to fade, replaced by a hollow ache in my chest. Do you even love him? I asked quietly. She hesitated, then shook her head. I don't know. You don't know? I repeated, looking up at her. You blew up our life for someone you're not even sure about? Her face twisted in anguish. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was going to end it. When? I asked bitterly. After one more hotel visit? One more lie? She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For once, she seemed at a loss. Here's the thing, Sarah, I said, my voice eerily calm now. You might not have meant for this to happen, but it did. And now, we're here. And I'm done. I'm done fighting for someone who doesn't care enough to fight for me. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. Ethan, please, don't say that. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, start over. I'll cut things off with Ryan, I swear. I laughed bitterly. You think a few therapy sessions are going to erase all of this? I gestured to the folder. You lied to me. You humiliated me. You betrayed me, Sarah. There's no coming back from that. She stepped closer, her hands outstretched. Please, Ethan. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us. I stared at her, searching for some trace of the woman I'd fallen in love with. But all I saw was a stranger who had made her choice. You gave up on us the moment you let him into your life, I said quietly. This is on you, Sarah, not me. Her hands dropped to her sides, her shoulders slumping in defeat. So, that's it? You're just done? I didn't end this, Sarah. You did. My voice was steady, but inside, I felt like I was unraveling. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me with tears streaming down her face. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the shattered remains of our life. As the door clicked shut behind her, I took a deep breath and let the silence wash over me. I wasn't sure what came next, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let her, or Ryan, get away with this. Not without consequences. The silence in the house was deafening after Sarah left the room. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the folder of evidence in front of me. Every photo, every email, every receipt. It all screamed of betrayal, but now it was more than just evidence. It was ammunition. I had given Sarah a chance to take responsibility, to show even a shred of accountability, but instead, she had tried to spin the blame, to twist the narrative into something that suited her. That was the moment I realized. There would be no reconciliation, no forgiveness. There would only be consequences. I spent the next few days working quietly, methodically. Every move I made was deliberate, calculated. First, I met with Mark, my lawyer. Together, we prepared the divorce papers, ensuring that every legal angle was covered. Sarah had no idea what was coming, and I planned to keep it that way until everything was set in stone. I want to hit her where it hurts, I told Mark, my tone cold and unwavering. She used my money to fund this affair. I'm not letting her walk away with anything more than she deserves. Mark nodded, his expression serious. We'll make sure she doesn't. But be prepared. If she fights this, it could get messy. She's already made it messy, I replied. I just want to finish it. Next, I reached out to Frank. The private investigator had already done excellent work gathering evidence of Sarah's affair, but I needed more. Ryan had become a loose thread in Sarah's web of lies, and I wanted to know everything about him. Frank, I said during our latest meeting, I need you to dig deeper. Find out who Ryan really is, his job, his finances, his history. I don't care how small the detail is. I want to know everything. Frank leaned back in his chair, studying me for a moment. You're planning something, aren't you? I met his gaze, unflinching. I'm planning to make sure neither of them forgets this. Frank nodded. All right, I'll get you what you need. Over the next few days, the pieces began falling into place. Frank uncovered everything I needed to know about Ryan. His shaky employment history, his string of failed relationships, and, most importantly, his tendency to leave a trail of unpaid debts wherever he went. It turned out that Ryan wasn't just a cheater. He was a leech, hopping from one partner to the next, taking whatever he could before moving on. It made my stomach churn to think of Sarah throwing her life away for someone like him. But in a strange way, it also gave me clarity. She hadn't chosen Ryan because he was better than me. She'd chosen him because he was easy, because he didn't hold her accountable. But now, I was going to hold both of them accountable. The day of my confrontation arrived sooner than I expected. Sarah had been unusually quiet over the past week, likely sensing that something had shifted between us. I hadn't brought up the affair again, but I knew she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was a Saturday morning when I made my move. I'd arranged for Frank to follow Sarah, who had told me she was meeting Emily for brunch again. Predictable. By 11 a.m., Frank sent me a message, there at the park. Same guy, sitting near the fountain. I arrived 20 minutes later, parking a short distance away and approaching on foot. Sure enough, there they were, Sarah and Ryan, sitting on a bench like they didn't have a care in the world. She was laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. I stood there for a moment, watching them. The anger boiled up again, but I forced it down. Losing my temper wouldn't help me now. This had to be precise, controlled. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward them. Ryan saw me first, his brow furrowing as I approached. Sarah followed his gaze, and when her eyes met mine, her face went pale. Ethan, she stammered, quickly pulling her hand away from Ryan's arm. What are you doing here? I ignored her, my eyes fixed on Ryan. So, you're the guy, I said, my voice steady but cold. Ryan blinked, clearly caught off guard. Sorry, who are you? I'm her husband, I said, crossing my arms. Or at least, I was. But I'm guessing she forgot to mention that. Ryan glanced at Sarah, who looked like she wanted to melt into the ground. Is this true? He asked, his tone wary. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. Don't bother, Sarah. He deserves to know the truth, doesn't he? Just like I did. Ryan stood, clearly uncomfortable. Look, man, I didn't know. Save it, I said sharply. You're not the victim here. You knew exactly what you were doing the moment you got involved with a married woman. Sarah jumped to her feet, her voice frantic. Ethan, stop. You're making a scene. Oh, I'm just getting started, I said, pulling out my phone. I opened the folder of photos and emails Frank had sent me and held it up for Ryan to see. This is who you're dealing with, buddy. She's been lying to both of us. Ryan's face twisted in disgust as he glanced at the screen. Wait, these are from months ago. You've been married this whole time? Sarah's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For once, she was speechless. I hope she's worth it, I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. Because she's your problem now. Without waiting for a response, I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving them both standing there in stunned silence. As I reached my car, a strange sense of calm washed over me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control. Driving away from the park, I felt an odd sense of clarity. For weeks, my life had been chaos, every revelation tearing at the fabric of the life I thought I had. But now, I was in control. I had taken the first step, forcing Sarah and Ryan to face the reality they had created. Still, I wasn't finished. What I had done at the park was just a warning shot. The next moves would leave no doubt about where things stood, and who held the power now. I went straight to my lawyer, Mark, to finalize the divorce papers. As I handed him the evidence Frank had gathered, Mark raised an eyebrow. "You've been busy," he said. "I want this airtight," I replied. "No loopholes. No leverage for her to twist this around." Mark nodded, flipping through the folder. "With this kind of evidence, you're in a strong position. She'll be lucky to walk away with anything at all." "That's the idea," I said, my voice cold. Over the next week, I turned my attention to our finances. Sarah had been using my money to fund her affair, and I wasn't about to let her walk away with a cent more than she deserved. I combed through every account, every transaction, working with Mark to ensure that everything was accounted for. Together, we uncovered more than I had expected. Hidden charges, secret withdrawals, and even a separate account Sarah had opened without my knowledge. "She's been planning this for a while," Mark said, shaking his head. "Looks like she was setting herself up for a clean exit." "Too bad for her," I replied. "She underestimated me." I froze the accounts and moved my assets into a trust Sarah couldn't touch. By the time I was done, she had nothing left to work with. It wasn't enough for Sarah and Ryan to face the consequences privately. I wanted the truth out in the open. For too long, they had acted as if they were untouchable, but that was about to change. Using the photos, emails, and Frank's reports, I created a dossier that detailed everything. I sent it to Sarah's family, her closest friends, and even a few colleagues I knew she respected. I didn't embellish or exaggerate. The facts spoke for themselves. The fallout was immediate. Within days, Sarah's carefully curated image began to crumble. Friends stopped returning her calls. Her family, who had always been supportive of us, were furious. Ryan didn't escape unscathed either. Frank had found out that he was in debt to several people, and I made sure that information found its way to the right places. His reputation and his finances were in tatters. One evening, Sarah showed up at the house, unannounced. She looked disheveled, her confident facade completely gone. "Ethan," she pleaded, "we need to talk." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "What's there to talk about?" Tears streamed down her face. "You've ruined my life. Everyone knows everything. I don't even know where to go from here." "Funny," I said coldly. "That's exactly how I felt when I found out about Ryan." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. For a brief moment, I almost felt pity for her. But then I remembered everything she had done, the lies, the betrayal, and I hardened my heart. "You made your choices, Sarah," I said. "Now you have to live with them." Frank's reports had revealed that Ryan wasn't just a cheater. He was a manipulator. He'd left a string of burned bridges and broken lives behind him, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. I contacted a few of the people Ryan had wronged, sharing the information Frank had gathered. It didn't take long for his past to catch up with him. Within weeks, he lost his job, his car, and eventually his apartment. One night, I saw him sitting outside a coffee shop, looking lost and defeated. For a moment, I thought about confronting him again, but I decided against it. His life was already falling apart, and I didn't need to add to it. With the divorce finalized and Sarah out of the house, I began to rebuild. I started therapy to process everything, focusing on myself for the first time in years. Slowly, the weight of the betrayal began to lift, replaced by a sense of freedom. Friends and family rallied around me, offering support in ways I hadn't expected. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Months later, I received a letter from Sarah. It was long, filled with apologies and regrets. She admitted she had made a terrible mistake, that she had been selfish and short-sighted. "I don't expect forgiveness," she wrote, "but I want you to know that I'll always regret what I did to us." I read the letter twice, then set it aside. Her words didn't change anything. I wasn't angry anymore, But I also wasn't interested in reopening old wounds. I sold the house we had shared and moved to a new city, far away from the memories of Sarah and Ryan. The fresh start felt like a clean slate, a chance to rediscover who I was without the weight of my past dragging me down. I focused on my career, my hobbies, and eventually, I started dating again. It was slow at first, but over time, I began to trust again. Looking back, I wouldn't have chosen this path, but I wouldn't change it either. Sarah's betrayal had shattered me, but it also forced me to grow in ways I hadn't expected. Revenge hadn't been my goal, not really. What I wanted was justice, closure, and a chance to take back control of my life. And I got that. Now, as I stand on the other side of it all, I feel something I hadn't felt in years: peace.